Hi everyone, welcome to this week's lunchtime webinar from the Sustainable Minerals Institute. Our speaker today is Julia Keenan, a research fellow with the Centre for Social Responsibility in Mining. Julia is part of the team working on the social aspects of mine closure research consortium, and she's going to present on their recent scoping project, Mining as a Temporary Land Use, Industry-Led Transitions and Repurposing. Julia joined the Centre for Social Responsibility in Mining in 2007, and her work spans a range of social sustainability issues related to the extractive industries in Australia and internationally. She specialises in researching the relationship between mining and local communities, with particular focus on agreement making with Indigenous peoples, gender and community development, and methodologies for analysing and improving resource companies' social performance. As per the previous one, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you can pop questions in there during the talk, and then at the end of the presentation, I will take the questions and pass them on to Julia. And then last week, I forgot to mention what the talk would be the following week. So I'm going to do that up front, and then I'll do it again at the end, just so you're aware. Next week, Lisa Forbes has kindly agreed to present on her work in research in flotation chemistry. So that's enough from me. Handing over to you, Julia. We look forward to your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Neville. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. Well, sort of. But yeah, thanks for coming along. This is a research project that I worked on with Sarah Holcomb last year. She can't be here today, but she said she's happy for me to present on her behalf too. So just to give you a bit of an introduction, well, the overview for this project, for this presentation is pretty basic. I'll give you the background, I'll introduce you to the consortium and a bit of context for the project. I'll go through the data and methodology, then I'll go through some of the findings and give you a few examples. So this project was part of the social aspects of Mine Enclosure Consortium that Neville mentioned. This is a multi-party industry university research collaboration that was established last year led by CSRM. We have 7 industry partners: Anglo, BHP, MMG, Newcrest, Newmont, Oceana and Rio Tinto. And last year we did several projects with them, this being one of them. And I've just put up the other projects there for you to have a look at. Now, you can go to mineclosure.net to have a look at all of those projects. I'll just give you a snapshot of one of them today. You're very welcome to go and read the very long report. Okay, so let's get started. Basically, we wanted to look at repurposing case studies, and what we had found was that there were a small group of repurposing case studies that were mentioned a lot in the literature, but there was no sort of overall picture of what those sites were like. There's also a lot of sort of like decision criteria for what you might do with a mine in the future after it's closed. But what we really wanted was not that theoretical lens, but really the empirical lens. So we spent a few months trying to gather as many sites as we could, and we ended up with 141 repurposing cases from 25 countries. We developed a database building on the S&P Global Market Intelligence database. So we used that, plus we did a lot of searching for relevant information. We were able to find cases in 25 countries, and we sort of had to limit ourselves in some of those jurisdictions so that we could try and get a broader view. So we've got 20 cases in the USA and the UK, more than 10 in Australia, Canada, Germany, China, Japan, but we had really big gaps in data from Russia, Western Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The cases that we found were covered 17 different commodities, the most common being coal and copper. Yeah, you can see more details of that in the report. So if you haven't seen the S&P Global Market Intelligence database, it includes basic information about mining operations, the location, the owner, the commodity, some historical data. So we added our own data categories to that related to the types of transitions that we could find, the repurposed land uses, and some other themes that emerged from the data. We looked at, timescales for repurposing. We looked at proximity to communities, whether or not it was on Indigenous land, who paid for the repurposing, who led the repurposing, that sort of thing. So we'll go through a few just of the sort of famous examples first up, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about when we're talking about repurposing. So one of the most common categories for repurposing was community and culture. And this included, well, this example here is, I'm sorry for my terrible pronunciation, Zollverein mine complex in Germany. And it's, there are several, this is in a mining heavy region, and they've turned the mine processing plant into a complex, kind of like the powerhouse here in Brisbane. So it's got sort of an entertainment hub, it's got restaurants, it's got cafes, it's got some historical information. And that's the kind of thing that we were seeing a lot of, that mining infrastructure was turned into things like outdoor theatres, community facilities for arts and culture, lots and lots of mining museums, and other sort of industrial heritage type places. But yeah, there's a real connection between community and expression and identity and mining. We also found a lot of conservation and ecosystem services repurposing. We had to distinguish here between what we thought was, regular rehabilitation and repurposing, turning it into something new. So we sort of had a few criteria about how we did that. It was, when the ownership transfers to a public entity and allows public entry, or when there's a education component, so or a research component. So this example here is the former Minahasa mine in Sulawesi in Indonesia. It was a Newmont mine, and it's been transformed into into a botanical garden. So it does, it collects native and endangered plants. It has a research centre, and one of the particular things it focuses on is butterflies. So that's nice. We also looked at recreation was a big one. So obviously there's a big connection between recreation and conservation, like lots of walking paths and nature walks and things like that in botanical gardens. But we also found a lot of sort of more what we called intensive recreation. So this is a underground bike park in the US, so you can go and yeah, go on your motocross bikes down there. There are quite a few of these actually, or underground caving, or like surf parks, or water skiing, or just not like snow skiing. There are also quite a few research and education facilities, quite like our own out at Indrapilli. One of the more famous ones is the Super Kamiokande neutrino detector. It's in Japan. It's, you know, Nobel Prize winning research, so there's a bit to live up to on our part. But yeah, there's a few of these because they're, you know, quite deep and protected from interference from other kind of radiation. And one of the other last categories is what we call construction, and it's sort of commercial construction. So it includes real estate, airports. This one here is a data center in an underground mine in Norway. So they move in data storage in shipping containers, and they use the fjord water for cooling. It's underground, so that's ideal as well. Clubs, casinos, aquaculture, bio-waste, the ski resorts, you know, 2 former Winter Olympics sites in our ex-mining areas. Town water supply, solar farms, airports, military bases, outdoor classrooms, water heat pumps, wildlife sanctuaries, walking, hiking, cycling, horse riding, motorcycling, running museums. We did try, given our limited time, to focus on industry-led repurposing rather than repurposing of abandoned and historical mines. So, but we still did pick up a lot of those. So what we found, basically, when we looked through, we found that, you know, repurposing often occurs after or alongside other activities in the closure process. So one of the things we did was establish these transition categories. The first 3 are post-closure activities, and the 4th is sort of repurposing initiated during the operations phase. So you can see there that there's a fair spread. But quite often repurposing needs to happen over stages, you know, stabilizing the area, regenerating, and then doing the actual repurposing. So you can see that why it's why it might be a difficult process to undergo. In terms of those land use categories, we ended up with 11 different categories. The most common being those ones that I just gave you examples from. We've then put those into 38 subcategories. And what we found really quickly was that, you know, the mine sites are typically reused for more than one purpose. So moving from a single but a single use with lots of connected activities to multiple uses. So we identified 313 different activities at our 141 sites. We've only found 25% of our sample where there was just sort of one use. Yeah, that's just an important thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about repurposing. It doesn't have to be the whole site. It could be different parts of the site used for different things, or multi-purpose investments. We looked at The factors that influenced whether we thought repurposing was likely to happen. So I guess the most influential thing is whether it's proximate to population centres. I mean, that generally means that the land is more valuable. So the economic viability is really a key driver. But we also found quite a few repurposing sites where residents of the community had organised and advocated for repurposing. So, you know, resident attachment we thought was a significant contributor to repurposing, and also the you know, ecological potential of the site. Internally, we found that the corporate approach to engagement was a really key factor. You know, companies that have made commitments to communities are more likely to follow through on them. You know, there are always examples of abandoned mines or mines that have gone into receivership or have been sold and passed on. But you know, the negative effects of that can sometimes be mitigated by strong ongoing connection before those things happen. Yeah, definitely the planning for post-closure being part of the closure process. I mean, part of the life of mine is has been really important for the industry-led repurposing. So, I guess what we sort of saw as the overall trends, where there's a real interest in the industry in looking at economic diversification on one hand. There's you know, there's a lot of hype about repurposing and turning mines into some other economic use. It sort of softens the blow of closure for a community. So I think, you know, that those two things intersecting, you know, make repurposing a sort of a hot topic at the moment. But what we found overall was that there are few examples of industry-led repurposing. We found, you know, thousands and thousands of mines, but, you know, over several months, we could only find 141 examples of repurposing. And a lot of those are not industry. So out of our 141 cases, we tried to categorize the entity that funded or led or the repurposing in terms of whether it was the particular mining company, whether it was a private investor, which in our case meant not the original company, it meant some other company was coming in, a particular public-private partnership, which I sort of expected to see more of, or whether the state had led. So we did find a lot of examples of state repurposing and some really significant programs of repurposing in the USA, the UK, China, where there's sort of a mass effort to repurpose a lot of abandoned mines. What we found is this is sort of a link between a mining company being around for a long time and investing in the community for a long time, that sort of makes repurposing more likely, whether that's, you know, because of established connections to other stakeholders, including the community, but you know, regulators, local governments, other industry in the area makes that easier. We're not sure. That's something we're investigating in the next project. And one thing that was quite interesting that we did find was that where concurrent rehabilitation has started quite early, there are sometimes conflicts in potential land uses. So rehabilitation can have one particular focus, but the focus isn't necessarily repurposing or, you know, looking at community objectives for land use or other potential uses for the reclaimed land. So there's something to look into there. Okay, so just finally, and I think I lost track of time. Yeah, okay, good. We're on track. We did find lots of innovative and creative examples of repurposing that were led by the industry. Some of them are occurring concurrently, but we just really found very little information about mines that had recently closed. You know, most mining company websites had little or no information about their closed sites. In comparison, there's quite a lot of interest in abandoned and historical mines. There's sort of historical and interest group research and documentation, but the more recent stuff can be harder to track down. And where we did find examples of repurposing, we found it quite difficult to access detailed information about how the transition took place. For example, you know, what the social context was, what the regulatory process was, who financed it, and all those sort of processes that enable repurposing. So the project that the consortium is working on this year is to look at one of those particular cases. And we're looking at the Woodlawn bioreactor and eco precinct. It was a copper mine. It's about an hour from Canberra. And it's now it's operated by Veolia, the refuse company, the waste company. So they've developed a bioreactor, as you can see in the picture there, which accepts about 20% of Sydney's putrescible waste. So, and creates and collects methane gas for heating, for electricity for Canberra homes. There's also an aquaculture project, there's solar, there's hydro farming. There's all sorts of innovative things going on there. But what we're really interested is that transition process. Who initiated it? What were the sort of threshold stages? You know, when, you know, what were the points where this project really progressed? And what was needed to support those sort of processes. So that's what Sarah will be looking at, and you can contact her for more information. So I think I'll leave it there because that's my 25 minutes up. And just to say that you can get the whole report on that miningenclosure.net website. And that we can also share the database with you. So that's publicly available. Okay, thanks. Do I go to questions now?
Yeah, Julia, thank you very much. And I can see there are a number of questions that have come through, and I'll step through those. There are nine open questions already, so So I think you're going to be busy, Julia.
Okay,
the first
let's
one
see what I can say.
How did you determine what factors influenced whether mine was reprocessed? And then how did you find which factors were statistically significant? Did you estimate models, or did you eyeball the case studies?
Yeah. No, this isn't. We didn't do any quantitative analysis of the influencing factors. Our database isn't representative. It was, it's a scoping study, so it was just trying to get a taste of what's out there. So yeah, it was going through the case studies where we could get more information. There's also real big gaps in the information. So I hope that answers that.
Yes, thank you. So that the next one was, have you seen reprocessing as part of a commitment made in the impact benefit agreement? Or what type of negotiation takes place between stakeholders and project promoters to plan for repurposing?
Yeah. That just. Just a note. You said reprocessing, which we didn't include repurposing. So that was just. I know it was just a.
The question said repurposing, and I scanned it and said reprocessing. So it is repurposing. That's
yeah. But just for the people who are wondering what we did with reprocessing, we didn't include that. Okay, so usually there's not a lot about closure in an impact benefit agreement. I can think of half a dozen examples where there are commitments to giving land back to Indigenous groups or transitioning ownership. But there weren't many cases in reality. I think as part of the closure planning process, the closure plan should be something that there's community engagement around, and most jurisdictions require that to be renegotiated or updated every few years. But we haven't found a lot of information about that yet. But that's one of the projects that the consortium is working on this year. So more to come in that space.
Okay, fantastic. All right, and then another one. If you found that a company had repurposed the mine site, who was running the venture afterwards? I imagine that a mining company does not want to become a data manager or running a shopping center. Do they set up new companies or sell the repurposed site? Who owns and who manages the repurposed site?
There is a huge variation in this. We couldn't find any pattern. In some cases, there's like a spin-off company. In some cases, it's a new company that takes on a portion of the mine lease. We did find that issue in particular is something that stops repurposing. We found several examples of, which we didn't put into the database, of attempted repurposing. So a company would approach a mine and say, we think we could use your underground to grow marijuana, for example. And, they did that for several years. And then when it came to actually closing the mine wasn't comfortable with that company's ability to maintain the rehabilitation or maintain the stability of the site. So that ended. So I think that's definitely an area that we need to look into a bit more as well.
All right, thank you. Did your research identify what areas on site, i.e. tailings facilities, open voids, etc., are the most difficult to repurpose, and for what reasons?
Well, we didn't necessarily find the most difficult. We did find the easiest, which is the areas that aren't mined or aren't touched, or are the infrastructure, either the buildings, the railways, the water treatment plants. Those sort of things are easily repurposed. I guess the most difficult parts would be the ones that you expect that are not, chemically stable. So yeah, the tailings facilities for one. Lots of open voids are simply repurposed. So lots of lakes or just stabilized slopes, sort of thing.
All right, thanks, Julia. And the next one is, did you find that companies were open to discussing repurposing initiatives, or did they consider these to be quite commercially sensitive?
In terms of the consortium, rather than this project particularly, I think we found that companies have been really interested in discussing initiatives, discussing potential, seeing these things as a bit pre-competitive, and perhaps more about reducing liability towards the end of mine life, and maybe mitigating community level conflict. But from what we could see from our desktop research, there's not a lot of information available, which makes me think that maybe these processes are quite difficult, so companies don't want to overpromise and underdeliver.
All right, and Julia, the next one has just moved as I was about to read it. Right, first of all, congratulations, excellent research, so take a bow. Did you find experiences on moving from large-scale miners to small-scale miners as part of the transition? It means transitioning from a large-scale operation to a small or artisanal scale operation.
Not any. We did find a few examples of like a tourism level small scale mining, so super small scale mining, like you can go and pan for some gold or that sort of thing. But in terms of ASM, we didn't find any examples that I can remember, but definitely it's a growing issue. So, sorry.
I think there are a couple of well-publicized cases where that's happened, and it'll be interesting to follow them. All right, we've got a request here to learn how we can encourage private mining companies for repurposing. And I suppose, are there any comments on how you think we could encourage private companies to look at repurposing of old sites?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about why we might have missed the ASM thing. Maybe we didn't consider that a different purpose. Maybe we consider that still mining. Anyway, so how can we encourage private mining? So I think there are definitely policy level barriers. So how do you deal with the transfer of the responsibility for those sites? I think there's definitely lots of examples of community groups and local councils or community or interest groups advocating for repurposing, and I think those sort of groups are really needed to see these projects through. Yeah, I think encouraging repurposing that is economically viable isn't probably so hard, but we're in areas where it's not as viable. I think investment support from states, whoever, will be required. So pretty standard stuff.
Right, and another comment saying great research and thanks for the presentation. The question is, did you form an opinion on the economic sustainabilities of those repurposed sites you identified?
Well, actually, my opinion was that I was surprised that there weren't more economic ventures. I guess it's really hard, and there are some really innovative community, sort of like perpetual trust kind of options for managing these sites as a public use, kind of a public use asset. That's certainly the case in the UK. They've transformed a great number of their coalfields or their coal mining sites into public conservation areas, public recreation areas that are all, not all, there's a substantial number that are managed by the Land Trust, which is a perpetual trust. So it sort of keeps those areas safe for community use into the future, and contribute, those sort of things contribute to other sustainability goals, so social capital, biodiversity, connecting animal habitats, all those kinds of things. But they tend to be in city centres or in outskirts. So.
All right. Really a couple here that I'm going to just run through quickly because I think they're more comments. One was, thanks for the photos. They're really amazing and bring the cases to light. Absolutely agree. The motocross one underground, it really looks interesting. The other one is, I suppose, a request on how they get, how do we get the kind of results? How do they get in touch with it? I think for sharing and influencing other people.
You can just email me.
So I think that, yep, if they can just email me.
I think if you want to find out a bit more about the influencing factors, I think have a look at the report. We go into that in quite a lot of detail. What we could find is really basic information. Like we couldn't get information on a lot of these things, so there's a lot of interpretation in there.
All right, that's fantastic. Thanks. And then, what do you see as the role of regulation in encouraging, requiring effective repurposing? And to be most effective, how long before closure should planning for repurposing ideally start?
Hi, Richard. Nice to see your name up there. I think the role of regulation, at the moment, there isn't regulation that facilitates this. Each of these cases is ad hoc. There were only a few programs, that Land Trust one I mentioned, and a couple of other national programs that really developed a process for regularising repurposing. They were going into a trust, and they were sort of abandoned sites. There weren't some of the issues involved that are in industrial or operating companies repurposing. I think land titling and liability are the two major issues that are regulatory processes don't handle, and so I think those need to be adapted to a repurposing mindset. That rather than just a one purpose of that mindset. How long should closure planning? Closure planning should start before you build the mine. I think that's the classic answer. But we did find that there's a long timeline for a lot of these projects, particularly the big ones. These projects are taking 10, 15, 20 years to get off the ground and to get operating. So, the more consistent and the longer frame of reference, the better.
Absolutely. All right, and then we've got two from Cornelia here. Which kind of opportunities around circular economy are you planning to research in the future? For example, tailings.
Personally, no plans as yet. Definitely an area of interest, but yeah, I think that the technical issues are a bit beyond my expertise. But I'm sure that those will be part of the consortium's interest. I can't think of one off the top of my head though.
Right, and that's a great question for us to get back to you on, because Glenn Corder and his team have been doing a lot of work around circular economy, and then the production centres with the JKMRC and BRC are doing a lot of work on tailings. So happy to take that as we might actually have a future presentation on that, I think. So thanks for that question, and we'll come back to you on that one. The next one is, thank you, and then we move on to how are you evaluating the willingness from the company to invest in repurposing? And this, of course, could be a win-win solution for the company to repurpose instead of a full rehabilitation and closure.
Well, I guess we haven't done that in this project. I think that our focus was on just sort of grabbing as many examples as we could. The idea of the win-win situation is definitely what interests mining companies, and anything that reduces the closure liability is something that's of interest. It's just, I think companies are struggling to understand their role in it and how it could be achieved. That's not really an answer, but it's the best I can do. We don't know, basically.
All right, and then the next one, I think, sort of follows on with that one. I'd like to ask if you could find information about projects located in countries or jurisdictions where there is no specific rules regarding the closure stage of a mine, and if there were any examples of repurposing in these jurisdictions.
Okay, well, I guess it's the countries that do have specific rules where it's easier to find information. I can share with you the database if there's any specific countries that you'd like to take a look at. Just send me an email and I can send you the database. We definitely where there's a okay, so there aren't a whole lot of companies with that include repurposing in their legislation about mine closure. As I said before, it's pretty much all ad hoc. One place to look for if you do want to look at a place that does have regulation around this is Indonesia. They have a pretty formalised process for handing land back to communities, and it does happen, as opposed to all the places where it doesn't happen. The mine is closed but never relinquished.
All right, Julia, and the next one, I suppose, builds on that a little bit in terms of how easy it is to access Chinese examples, and the one that's been cited, the repurposed of a mine site into a 5-star hotel.
Yeah, that's a pretty well-known one too. That's actually a quarry. So we did include quarries in our sample, but I think that makes it kind of easy to repurpose because you don't necessarily have as much of the environmental issues or the scale or a lot of things. The Chinese examples, there's actually a large, it's called the Green Mining Initiative in China, where they're turning former mine sites into mining national parks. So there's quite a lot of information there. Don't speak Chinese, unfortunately. So there was a lot of information that I didn't have access to, but I was quite surprised at how much there was. I'm happy to share with you that background research, if you like, to send you an email.
All right, Julia, well, I wasn't sure we were going to be able to get through all the questions in the time that was left, and you've done a fantastic job, and definitely the most questions we've had in our lunchtime webinar. So well done. It's a new record.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for your presentation today, and we really appreciate it.
I feel like I haven't spoken that much in weeks.
No, well done, and thank you very, very much. It's a fantastic presentation.
No worries.
So it just leaves me to close off and just remind you that next week the lunchtime seminar will be given by Lisa Forbes, and she'll be presenting on research in flotation chemistry. So thank you very much, everybody, and thanks for dialing in.
See ya. Thank you.